Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do. To educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade, Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. All right, everybody, what's going on? Welcome to the podcast today. I have a special guest, someone who I actually reached out to, who is a friend of my girlfriend and a trainer of my girlfriend, who I was like, I need some help with sort of my mindset around food and behaviors. Who would you recommend? And she recommended the guest today, who is Aubrie Pohl, who is a master instructor in neuro-linguistic programming. She also trains people to do neuro-linguistic programming, and she's a master in life coaching as well, and someone who, when I reached out to you, Aubrie, and kind of went through the program with you, this NLP, I didn't really know what to expect, but through follow-up, it's been pretty profound, and I also thought maybe we'll talk a little bit about some of that follow-up now, too, since it's been a couple of weeks since we talked with each other. But I want people to get a sense of what this is and what it is like, because I found it really, really powerful. But why don't we just start with you sort of giving us a background on how you got into neuro-linguistic programming, what it is, and anything else you think we should know to kind of get the conversation kicked off.
Amazing. Thank you for having me on the show today. I really appreciate your platform and the opportunity to share this potent transformational information with your crew. So this is awesome. If I were to begin, I'll frame the situation of how I was as a teenager. And there was this giant paradox in my life of having so much academic success, right? I was over a 4.0 in high school. I was varsity soccer captain, team captain. So from external viewpoints, I was a very successful young teenager. However, internally, my world was traumatizing. My self-identity, my belief systems. I remember writing in notebooks how ugly I was and what I didn't deserve. And so there was this very confusing paradox between how others perceive me and how I was truly experiencing my life. And through the course of my teenage years, things just kind of fell into this downward spiral until I was 18 years old and I was given a very lovely gift from life, one that literally shoved my face into the dirt and got me to think differently. And that was being diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And through the process of a couple surgeries to get my thyroid gland removed, my vocal cords were scratched. I couldn't talk. And so if I couldn't explain what was happening, and if I couldn't share my words, everything was inside. And when that happened, I simmered. And at 18 years old, I got to take this big glance at life and say, how am I living life? And it was this very interesting introspective phenomenon that happened to me, because I started to realize that when I said I'm sad, the I was a part of the sentence. And if you think that you're experiencing something, you're acknowledging that you are experiencing it. And if you're experiencing something that's negative or doesn't feel good, what does that mean? Does that mean that you're stuck forever? And I didn't want to believe that. I was like, this can't be true. And so I started to understand this development of positive neuroplasticity training, of training the brain. And that was in my late teens. And through my 20s, I got certification after certification. I was really into this whole hashtag lifelong learner idea. And then by another life serendipity, when I was 24 years old, I was bear crawling with one of my fitness clients, and he tells me, oh, I run this leadership development conference. I was like, oh, I'll go to that. I'm into being a leader. And lo and behold, it was the portal into neuro-linguistic programming. It was everything that I had been doing, changing the mindset, understanding that happiness is within myself. And it was a structured format of that. So diving into neuro-linguistic programming when I was 24 and I'm 31 now, I now see that the world is what you make of it, right? You don't see the world the way that it is. You see the world the way that you are. And this whole system completely helped me rewire these negative thought patterns that I, behaviorally adapted into when I was younger. And over the last 7 years, I've worked with hundreds of clients. And now I'm an NLP master trainer that works with students, that teaches life coaches how to bring these skills and these creative questions. And what's different about NLP, it's not advice. It's not a coach telling you what to do. NLP is about asking yourselves questions about your emotional management, about your belief system, about your value system. And so it's much more than just this surface structure of behavior. You dig deeper and you get really into the roots of subjective reality. And so if I were to explain NLP, it is understanding how you are responding to your external environment, and then from there, deciding what you want. It's a very empowering system of self-therapy and also life coaching. And it's a therapeutic setting of how can you feel even more empowered? How can you feel happier? What do you want? And the steps of how to get there. So it is amazing, powerful stuff.
Yeah, I love it. And what I want to do is the first big question I want to ask you is really sort of a frame that I often use. And I just want you to kind of say, yeah, Jade, that makes sense, or no, it doesn't, or you might want to think about it this way. I'm just really interested in your viewpoint on this, because when I hear neuro-linguistic programming, when I first heard the term, I was like, okay, so that's neuro, brain, linguistic, language, programming. And then I thought, okay, so is this the stories we're telling ourselves? Is this the language that we sort of use to describe the world? And then what underpins that, right? So from my perspective, when I first heard it, I was like, okay, I kind of think I get this perhaps, and you'll tell me now if I'm sort of right here, but I have always had this idea that people tell themselves stories, whether they realize they're telling themselves stories or not. And these stories can be as simple as a single thought, and these thoughts then elicit feelings, and the world then shows up for you a particular way. Now, this is a very, I don't know neuro-linguistic programming, but this is sort of how I've always sort of seen this when working with clients. And I just want to know, is this sum it up to some degree? Am I describing this correctly, or am I talking about something that is completely different or something that's loosely correlated? I'm just curious if this idea of we tell ourselves stories, these stories are, sort of intimately connected to our thoughts, and these thoughts give rise to feelings, which then sort of create this loop about how we see and interact with the world.
Yep. I think you're spot on. I think your interpretation of it is very valid and correct. And I think you give yourself a lot of permission with that interpretation to have more flexibility in change of behavior, change of thought, because what you're mentioning is that it's a story. So what you're saying is that it's not necessarily reality, right? It's not objective reality. It's not what is. When people tell themselves their stories, the beacon of awareness, the beacon of hope is when you recognize that it's a story, that it's not necessarily objective reality. It is what you have been telling yourself about objective reality. And from there, there's a lot of work that you can do to change that story, to manipulate the story, manipulate it in a good way, like how a masseuse manipulates muscles, these ways of creating a framework of your life that helps you through the stories that you tell yourself. And I will mention that it is even more than just the stories, because the stories point to just the language and the sentence structure. There's also the pictures that you have in your mind. There's also the kinesthetic feelings that you're feeling in your body. So NLP all encompasses the five senses, how you see the world through the pictures, what you feel, what you're experiencing, and what you're saying.
Yeah. When you and I worked together, it was really interesting because from my perspective, not understanding what was happening, what it felt like was, okay, so Aubree's asking me a lot of different questions from different perspectives. I'm giving her feedback, and then she's keying in on, it seemed to me, certain aspects of the way I was talking or the things I was saying, and it seemed like you were very interested in getting very particular about exactly what I was saying. And then you had several techniques you used that, from my perspective, felt like, it felt like a reframe to some degree, but it also just felt like a big aha moment. Like I remember this one moment when we're working together and we're going down two tracks, two things that sort of, I guess, make me, two behaviors that I have. And you kept asking me about, well, what are you trying to get? What's the feeling? What's the feeling? What's the feeling? And in both cases, these two opposing sort of behaviors seem to coalesce into one particular thing I was trying to get with them. And I know this is, I'm sure there's a ton of different techniques, but I'm wondering if you can kind of walk us through just what you're doing there with a client in the beginning is, because it seemed like question. Then all of a sudden you're starting to see patterns that maybe I'm unaware of. And then you begin to help me suddenly see those patterns myself. It's like I almost was like, oh my gosh, I see that as well. And then there were different tools that you use. But I'm just curious if I'm seeing this correctly in what you were doing. I'm a little bit curious on what are some of these techniques. And then I'm most curious for the listener on if they can do this for themselves to some degree. Like how much of this self-talk and some of these underlying patterns can we spot ourselves through NLP techniques?
Definitely. First of all, it was so fun to work with you because you're a very aware individual and you recognize your patterns and you are willing to change. So it was, top clientele if you're looking at how you approach the situation. And from an NLP trainer and a life coach perspective, what I'm listening for is cues in certain language patterns. Right. I start off with a blank slate. That's why we ask so many questions, because essentially I make sure I don't fill in any of your story. I make sure that I don't make any mind reads or any assumptions about who you are or what you're experiencing. So with all the questions, it's allowing you and your unconscious, subconscious mind to share what's coming up. And then what I started to notice with you was this sentence structure and this linguistic pattern of a separation of behavior, right? Part of me wants to do this and part of me wants to do that. And what we call that in NLP, and it's a very traditional pattern of NLP, a technique of NLP, is called parts integration. Because what I was noticing from the words you were saying is that these two parts are essentially at a battle with one another, that they're fighting, that part of me wants to do this, but the rebel says no. And you're like, oh, okay. So here's this whole individual, and one of the presuppositions and big belief systems of NLP is that everyone's whole. Everyone is pure and whole. And when we have these ideas of behavioral traits that contradict one another, again, that comes from our story. Right. And maybe some people say things like, oh, it feels like I have a split personality sometimes because there's two different parts of me. And I'm listening to that and I'm like, oh, that's clearly parts integration. There's two parts that are non-integrated in this whole being. And what this whole being forgot to remember is that they are a whole being, that there is, no such thing as parts. Yet parts integration is really important, and it points to a lot of ideas of how behavior can adapt over time. And what was really important about the parts integration that we did is that you don't feel aversion to one of these parts. You don't feel angry at yourself when one of these parts shows up, because that part with the negative behavior showed up for a reason. It brought you adaptation. It found a way to survive. And over time, it just splintered itself from the system. And then when you look at that big splinter, years later, you're like, oh man, I feel like two different people are inside of me, or this one pops out. And what we can recognize about ourselves and what listeners can really focus in on is, do you feel that? Do you feel that another part of you takes over? You know, oftentimes people will name this part and they'll say it was like the rebel child, or they'll say it's like the angry version of me. And they talk about these different versions of themselves. And that language pattern shows that there is a non-integration. And how do we bring integration back to the whole system? Is to honor and recognize the part with the negative behavior and figure out what it wants. Because ultimately, that part is a part of the whole system. And ultimately, everyone has a big, higher positive intention for their life. And it just manifests in negative behavior sometimes. But, you know, like a smoker, they usually smoke to relax. If someone that overeats, they usually overeat to feel better or to mitigate emotions. Something like that usually happens. And when we can bring awareness to that, we can bring and hold the foundation for integration to begin again, because we get to remember that we're whole. And so with your parts integration, it was all about asking these two different parts, for what purpose? You know, why is this behavior that comes out that you don't like? Well, I know you don't like the behavior, but for what purpose is it there? And when you find the purpose, you start to see the deeper belief system that's underneath it and what you truly want. And then you hold both of those parts and you say, oh, they can come together. They can work together. It is possible. And you create the whole being once again. And then, like, I was so excited to hear your feedback, because it's exactly what we want. That integration becomes easy and effortless over time when you recognize that you are whole again. And this bad behavior really had good intention.
Yeah, and just to fill you all in who are listening to this, how cool it was for me, the two sort of parts that I was working on, there was one part of me who's, you know, when he's eating well and doing good, he feels really good. He doesn't necessarily even feel like he's missing out on anything. And then there's this other part that wants to just drink too much, eat too much, and can really get into this negative place. And what Aubrie sort of did is kind of bring me to a place where I understood I was after relaxation and freedom. And we kept sort of digging into that and seeing that these two things weren't actually that far apart. Now, moving forward from that one thing, what happens is I'm still living my life pretty much the same way, except something just sort of naturally has happened since then that I gave you feedback on, Aubrie, and it's relatively been the same. I'm still, you know, having my wine at the end of the day, eating some of the things that I want, but for some reason, I just can't seem to bring myself to overeating this stuff. Like it just doesn't, I still do it. But and maybe for all I know, maybe I am eating the same amount. I'm certainly not judging it at all though. Like part of me is just sort of going, this is fine. This is good. And I seem to be able to stop myself and sort of feel better about it. And from my perspective, it's a much better way to be, even if I don't reach goal sets, for example, which I didn't necessarily think I have a goal from the standpoint of body comp. I mean, everyone would want to lose weight and look a little bit better. I'm no different. But I think the major goal for me now in hindsight, regardless of how I felt then, is just that I'm more relaxed with the way that I'm living. And I seem to not be battling myself as a result of this. So do you see this a lot with NLP, or is this just with the parts integration? Because I know there's many, many different aspects of neuro-linguistic programming. I simply had this battle of parts. I'm sure there's other people that have other things going on, but is that what you tend to see, or do you see even sort of more profound changes, and how fast does it tend to happen? I mean, you and I had one session with this, and I'm sure I could use a follow-up, but it's been pretty profound in terms of how at least I am no longer at odds with my brain. It feels like I'm just kind of more relaxed with it all.
Oh, I love that. I love that. The question is, how fast can you make a decision like that? Snap, right? Mm-hmm. It only takes one great question to offer and provoke this entire new idea of life. And with parts integration, it's very similar. I remember one of the key aspects that both beings were going for, both parts of you were going for, was an easy and meaningful life. So you had this part that came out and was like, I just want to live easy. I want to have my wine. I want to have my pizza. But it would kind of overdo the easy, because you would also have the rebel that comes out and is like, nah, I don't need structure. Like, I can do what I want. And to understand that you had that ease in you, and that's what it really wants, is just to relax. And when you said just now, you're not as hard on yourself, even if some days you do eat the same amount that you used to, the emotional management has changed. And that's 100%. What we really hone in on with NLP is self-identity and self-esteem, because I do care about what your story is, and I do care about what your behaviors are, but ultimately I don't care about the content of how these things are showing up. I care about the core. I care about the structure of your nervous system and how you're responding to yourself. So your parts integration was it was complex and it was beautiful and it was very strong, and the shift happened. And that's what we see over and over again. NLP is quick transformation. And sometimes it does take a little bit longer, a few sessions, but again, it only takes one moment to notice that there is a new choice of how your brain can interpret your reality. And from there, people usually take it and run, because there's this underlying current in our subconscious that wants happiness, that wants ease, that wants peace. And when you get a little insight into that, there's a natural tendency to keep it going. I've seen things on all sorts of the polarity. I've seen people have very dramatic and explosive are the words, where they're just crying because there's this deep new insight that they've had into their life. And then some things are like slow water drips over time. These smaller realizations that end up being a big, puddle and pool at the end of things. And NLP has just really been so insightful for me, and coaching it over the years, of how powerful it is to take a look on how the human experiences themselves, because ultimately that's what's going to shift behavior. A change in thought might not create the change in the life. A change in thought plus change in behavior will create the change. So we focus on what the core is, the root, the idea, and the beliefs, most likely the limiting beliefs that came about because of the life situation. And then also, what do you do, right? I'm not trying to hold life coaching sessions where people just walk out of it and they're like, I feel better. Because it's not just about the feeling. I need to know that when you step forward in life, that there's going to be a new adaptation of behavior because of this new neuroplasticity.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Where do these things, in your estimation and the way you see this, where do these, this disease or these negative beliefs or these negative stories or these stories that are at odds or this negative self-talk, where do these things come from? I mean, we oftentimes hear an awful lot about childhood traumas and adverse events and, our individual pain. Are these protective in a sense? And is that where these stories come from? Are they driven by culture? Is it sort of all of the above? What is your take on why we, sort of get in these negative thinking patterns and speak the way we do that then can sort of hold us back as humans?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And the one word I have for you is it comes from a decision. Now, that decision to think that belief or that limiting belief or that negative thought, that decision can either be conscious or unconscious, right? And a lot of it comes from unconscious patterns of the way that we grew up, our attachment styles to our parents. You could have had one teacher in second grade that said, you're just not good at math. And then here you are, 20, 30 years later, thinking that you can't really analyze life in the same way. And you feel this, you succumb to that negative self-belief that somebody told you. And so all of these negative frameworks, my model of the world is that they come from a decision, and that decision is either conscious or unconscious. Because I get it. Like, even myself, when I was writing in a notebook when I was 16-year old that I'm ugly, that I don't deserve life, like, I didn't decide that. Like, what the fuck? Why would I say I decided that, Aubrie? But it was an unconscious decision. So when we recognize these negative belief patterns, first and foremost, hold space and grace for yourself, because you allow yourself to take the ownership that you decided it, because then you're at the wheel, instead of the victim mentality of like, oh no, it's the way my parents raised me. Like, yeah, they raised you that way. And what are you going to do about it now that you have the awareness? You get to redecide and create a new interpretation. When we recognize those belief patterns, it is the huge leverage point for change. And if we want to, my friends and I call it PTFD, point the finger disorder. If you want to point it out at the world and say, oh, it's because of the way that I grew up. It's because I didn't have the financial resources. It's because I didn't have the opportunities as everyone else. Let's take a new view and say, it's not your fault that some of this stuff happened, especially traumatic shit. Like, it's not your fault. And you have responsibility, the ability to respond now. And that's why NLP, you interject NLP right there, because now it's time to create the new framework of what do you want? How do you make stuff better? And you can totally do that when you believe that it's all about decisions that you make in life.
It's time to talk about one of our sponsors of today's episode, AG1 by Athletic Greens. Now, many of you have heard me say this before, but I am not a fan of vegetables, which I know is funny given I've been in the health and fitness industry for so long. I blame my mother and father for this. When I was a kid, what they would do was essentially take the broccoli, the Brussels sprouts, the spinach, the collard greens, and just steam them. No salt, no fat, no taste whatsoever, just these bitter greens. And so I developed a distaste for a lot of different vegetables, which has stayed with me into adulthood. One of the things I've done to mitigate that is use a greens powder pretty much ever since greens powders have come out on the market. And I've tried every single one. They started out tasting like swamp water. I found a few that I really like the taste, but recently, one that I have been taking for a very long time, as you all know, I wear a continuous glucose monitor. I found that it was actually spiking my blood sugar because probably the tapioca starch in it, which some people don't respond to tapioca starch with elevated blood sugars. I was. And so it sent me on a mission to find another one. And one of my friends turned me on to AG1 by Athletic Greens. Now, I've heard about Athletic Greens and AG1 for quite some time. I just never tried it. And now that I have tried it, I have become a huge fan, so much so that I partnered with Athletic Greens and AG1 to sponsor this podcast. Now, let me tell you what happened here. After I saw that my blood sugars were spiking, my friend gave me a couple samples of AG1. I began using those and testing the blood sugar and found there was no spike. The other thing I found is that AG1 is interested in its taste profile. It's very neutral. The one I was taking before was a little sweet. I really loved it. But this one is very neutral, which actually suits me because what I found is I can actually not only take this first thing in the morning in water and have it taste very neutral, almost like there's nothing there. I can also add it into my protein shakes, which means now I'm getting double the greens than I was getting previously because I add this right into my protein shakes and it does not change the flavor of the shake at all. The other thing I realized once I started looking at the label is that this product is not simply a greens product. It also is a multivitamin, multimineral. It also has fiber, which acts as a prebiotic. It has probiotics in it, and it has functional mushrooms, which act as adaptogens in it. That's 4 different products essentially in one. And I've been taking mushrooms for some time. I stopped taking them now because now I have this in my greens. I have also taken my multivitamin and make this my multivitamin. So I'm actually saving money, and this is going to save you money as well. The product AG1 is also NSF certified. And you might say, Jade, what does that mean? The National Sanitation Foundation is a foundation that essentially does testing on products to make sure there are no harmful substances, no persistent organic pollutants, no heavy metals. Now, this costs money to do. AG1 and Athletic Greens has spent the money on this. They spend money on making sure that the product that you are getting is good quality without contamination in it. And you might say, well, Jade, isn't this true of all products? And actually, no, it is not. If you ever follow some of the news in this area through consumer labs and other things that do testing on these products, you'll see that many of them will have trace levels of things like mercury and cadmium and lead and things like that in them because they're not doing this testing. So this is an extra piece of insurance for us. The other thing I love about this product that I learned as I was doing my research on it is that this is the 52nd tweak or adjustment they have made to this product in their existence. AG1 has been tweaked 52 times. Now you might say, well, Jade, why would they be doing that? And the reason why is because they continue to improve. We know that science is evolving. We know that it's not just about more nutrients. It's about balanced nutrients. It's about the Goldilocks effect of this. And they are constantly learning, as we all are, and then constantly adjusting their product to taste better, to be more efficient and effective in delivering the nutrients. It acts as an antioxidant. It acts as a multivitamin. It's a prebiotic, a probiotic, and an adaptogen all in one. They have mastered this over several iterations of this particular product. And so I am a huge fan right now of AG1 and Athletic Greens. And I'm hoping that you will check this out. It's time for all of us to reclaim our health and arm our immune system with convenient daily nutrition. And AG1 does that with just one scoop in a cup of water every single day. That is all you need. There is now no longer a need for a million different pills and supplements to look after your health. All you need is this particular one. It really clears the stage to simplify your supplement regime. To make it easy for you, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/next level. That's athleticgreens.com/next level to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Check out AG1. I love it. I know you're going to love it. And I'm so happy that they are on board to sponsor the podcast as well. Thanks so much. Check out AG1, athleticgreens.com/next level. And let's get back to the show. Okay. So yeah, this is really cool. So let me just feed that back to you and for the listeners, see if I have it right. So something happens, right? Some kind of event, some kind of interaction, something happens in your life. You choose to see it a particular way. So in a sense, your conscious or unconscious mind either agrees or disagrees or sees it in some way. And you can make a choice right at that place when that happened that can subconsciously follow you around, impacting all future choices. It kind of, if this is how it works, it kind of reminds me of like talking to some shamans about their work, where sometimes they kind of see it as you're moving along and there's an entity, and then you make a choice about something that happened. And it's like, now there's two entities. It's sort of like the 6-year-old self, especially if you get stuck there in that choice and this other thing goes on and you're making all these choices in life, and you have these different parts or these different stories that you're essentially telling based on these different choices that you're making. This is the way it was described to me, by a shaman. And then from there, if this is lining up with the way NLP sees it, that impacts like a ripple, the way you think, feel, and act perhaps about future events that look somewhat similar. And it sounds like what you're saying, if this is the case, is that we go back and we essentially say, okay, well, this did happen, but I get to choose to respond now differently from this moment forward. But we have to sort of find what the choice was or what we've been telling ourselves to make that different choice. Am I getting it, or am I missing something there in terms of how I'm explaining that?
You're absolutely getting it, and well said. When NLP first came about in the mid 70s, it's kind of like an offset to the therapeutic industry, right? So instead of going to college and becoming a therapist, there's this other alternate route that you can become a life coach. And neuro-linguistic programming, when it first came about, because of these rapid thought transformations, these new ideas, these new choices, people called it magic. And NLP has this very magical quality to it because the pictures in your brain change, your feelings change, but nothing has to change outside of you for everything to change inside of you sometimes. And that magical quality allows you to tune into the multi-sensory experience of life. So I can see how it's very related to what the shamans were saying.
Yeah, and actually, let me, if you don't mind, Aubrie, I just want to kind of run something by you and just get your thoughts on this and just see how this is. And the listener, you'll have to excuse me. This is going to get a little woo-woo, and I just want to see how you see this, Aubrie. But one of the things that I've been doing is reading a lot, and I'm going back to school to get my PhD in transpersonal psychology because I'm interested in sort of the level of consciousness that connects all people. And obviously, this is why I'm interested in NLP as well, after, sort of working with you and talking with London about how all this works. But I want to see how this hits you. So what I've been framing up in my mind based on my reading is that there's this idea of this universal consciousness, right? This universal collective consciousness. Some people might call it God. Some people might call it source. Some people might call it universe. Some people might call it, whatever you want to call it, whatever your beliefs are in regards to this. The way I see it is sort of this universal consciousness that's sort of like this flowing, sort of stream that we can sort of dip our hand in and sort of pull understandings out of this when we are in particular mind states. Things like psychedelics can do this, meditation can do this. Sometimes I think when you're just relaxed, dream states can do this. But anyway, we're pulling up information from this universal consciousness. And I look at it like we're kind of co-creators at best, right? Because in a sense, we have our drives and what we want to do. This universal collectiveness or consciousness also has sort of its underlying, impetus to evolve. And we sort of find ourselves in between these two sort of consciousness, our ego consciousness and then our collective consciousness. Now, you mentioned the unconscious, right? So to me, I kind of frame this up and go, okay, our ego conscious, what makes me an individual, and this collective conscious, what connects me to Aubrie and all of you and the whole world. And then there's this unconscious sort of place. And this unconscious place seems to me, whenever I am tapped into it, it doesn't deliver words to me. It does indeed seem to deliver things in almost like pictures or myths and metaphors or symbols and these kinds of things. It doesn't seem to necessarily speak the same language that I'm speaking. And so it seems like, if I'm reading into you correctly, this NLP seems also to account for this, because while you are working on my words to some degree, it also seems like you're sort of tapping into this other piece of communication that doesn't seem to speak in words. And I'm wondering, one, how you see this. Have you ever thought about it this way, or does NLP think about it this way? And if I'm correct, how do we get into deciphering some of these symbols and more metaphorical things or pictures or emotions that don't speak, language, don't say I am blah, 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 but instead sort of have these other components to it. And I just wanted to throw that out there because some of the things you were saying were reminding me of this. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this. You may not, but I'm just curious if you do, and how you see that.
Oh, I love this question. First and foremost, I do dibble dabble in the woo woo. So what I really love about NLP is that it's this bridge. It's this bridge, I say, between the 3D and the 5D, because what you're pointing to is what is beyond words. And there's this syntax of experience underneath the words that we all have. And the metaphor we use in NLP is like an iceberg, right? So you have the surface structure, which is above the water of the iceberg. But then what else is there? There's the deep structure. And that's everything that's beyond the words. Because when somebody translates their internal experience into words, they are extremely filtering the experience. When somebody says, I am depressed, it's not just 3 words. It's an entire deep structure iceberg of their reality that has been the sum total of their emotional experience thus far. So there's a lot of stuff going on in every complex individual that is much more beyond what they are saying. And what can really be helpful in NLP is gaining that relationship with your internal world. If I were to say, go ahead and think of a dog, think of a dog. And when you're thinking of this dog, what color is the dog? Is there a scene that the dog is in? Are they outside? Are they inside? And we have this realm of our internal world that is completely personal to your experience. And your ability to translate that internal world into words is going to help people understand you more and is going to help people help you more if you need help. This world that we're pointing to that's beyond words is the human phenomenon, right? This conscious phenomenon. Because if you were to, I've worked with cadavers before, and if you were to take a cadaver and you were to cut open the brain, you're going to find brain tissue. You don't find the mind. You don't find the feeling of the first kiss or the smell of the cookies you love so much. You just find brain tissue. So what we're pointing to here in NLP is the mind and how the mind manifests itself in every individual reality. The skill set here and the muscle that we're working in NLP is, do you understand that world beyond words that's inside of you? And a lot of people, the biggest example is when people have fears and people have phobias. If somebody's afraid of heights, why? Why are they often afraid of heights? Because they have this movie playing in their brain that they're going to fall off of the height. And it's not necessarily because then you have other people that, they work in high places for a living. They jump out of planes on purpose. But you have other people that experience that with complete terror and paranoia. And it's because of the syntax that's underneath it all. It's because of that world and that deep structure that's inside of them. This is where I nerd out completely in NLP because it's so beautiful and magical how we all have a different internal experience. And when we're asking questions in NLP, it's to uncover what that deep structure is so that we can bring it more into the surface through words to understand it even better.
Yeah, I love that. And it makes me sort of think of, I also would be remiss if I didn't ask you this, to what degree do other people's stories and the way they think, these people in our lives and our, life circumstances, to what extent do they hold back this work? Like, for example, if I have, people in my life who are complete enablers, who are always wanting to eat more pizza, drink more wine, do all the things with me, and or they are very negative in like, why don't you just relax and have fun? Stop with all this other stuff. To what degree does NLP protect against that? Or is this something that an NLP practitioner is aware of and points to? Or is it just simply my story about other people? I'm just curious about this. I know other people are going to essentially say, okay, yeah, I can change my thoughts. I can change the way, maybe the choice that I make and take responsibility. But I'm always in and around other people who have opinions about things who are going to influence me for better or worse. And I'm wondering, how powerful is NLP in that realm?
NLP helps you recognize and understand your personal world, which helps you become more defined in your boundaries in regards to other people. And sometimes you don't know your boundaries until they get crossed. But if you have these people in your life that are enablers, it also will point to your self-esteem and your belief system of allowing other people to enable bad behaviors. Or, if you fall into the peer pressure sometimes, is it because you feel like your story is that they won't be friends with you anymore unless you do these behaviors with them? And so it does help really define your boundaries and what you want and help hold on to them stronger, and how to explain it in a way that's not like, hey, you're being a jerk friend, like you're contributing to my bad behavior. That's pointing the finger again. It's now saying, I've had this experience and this is the behavior that I want to do. I don't want to be eating pizza every night. Is there an opportunity to do something else? I feel, and in my experience personally, describing my thoughts and my feelings has been more of the journey for me, because I'm very internalized and I'd rather sometimes just like not say anything than say something. But when you get to define your boundaries in your inner world so well that you confidently share it with other people, it'll help you spread yourself out from those pressures or the enabling, because you become a well-defined individual because you understand your personal deep structure. And you get flexibility because some days you want to be with that friend and hang out and eat pizza and have fun. And that's totally okay, because you'll also have the tools to reconsider what your values are and your beliefs are. And you don't need to walk away from having a great night with friends saying, oh, I can't be this person anymore. You can say like, wow, here are the good things about that friend. And was there a boundary that I crossed within myself because I understand myself so well now? And then you can act accordingly and adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I love this so much. And I think a lot of you who are listening to this, who have listened to me before, would probably see how in alignment actually you and I are, Aubrie, in terms of like how I see this, because I love the way you brought it back to self. Because part of the thing I oftentimes say to people, I'm like, I get it. You know, there are other people that are going to do things that are going to potentially drive you crazy, but you can't control anything other than your own sort of thoughts, behaviors, and action. And this actually goes back to one of my favorite philosophies. The Stoics talk a lot about this as well. They talk about, look, there's things that you can control completely. There's things you control only partly. And then there's things that you don't control at all. And they are always like, look, you always focus on what you can control. And I think the only thing we truly can control is our thoughts and reactions to the things that happen in life. And so outsourcing this at all, or pointing the finger out there at all, seems to be a problem from my point of view. And it sounds like NLP just essentially gently nudges you back to this place of saying, look, this is about you and sort of the way you're dealing with this. You're not going to be able to change them, but you certainly can change your language, your boundaries, and other things. And it's about getting aware of those things. There's one thing that one final sort of question I want to talk to you about that can be extremely triggering for a lot of people. And this is this idea that I think you alluded to, and I've been talking a lot about, and I call it the distinction between the victim and the hero. And I want to see what you recommend with this. But from my perspective, things happen in life, and some pretty horrible things happen in life to people. We all have had trials and tribulations and traumas. And from my perspective, if we want to be good next level humans, we certainly want to take the time to heal, to allow ourselves to feel sorry for ourselves, to be angry, to feel all the emotions that might come along with these trials, tribulations, and traumas. From my perspective, though, I feel like it is absolutely a positive thing even that you can feel being victim, or you can feel these emotions. The way I oftentimes phrase it is, I think it's a mistake when we choose to live out these emotions day in and day out, week in and week out, month in and month out, year in and year out. In other words, at some point, I do think there's a time where the victim has to choose to see it differently, to say, I choose to no longer live in victim, despite the fact that I have every right to have felt it. And people, should, help and should feel compassion and empathy for me. But at some time in the future, they're not necessarily going to anymore. They're going to move on. Life moves on. And it seems to me that a lot of people choose to stay stuck in the feelings of victim. And I think that perhaps that is a huge mistake, perhaps the biggest mistake. And it's also a very triggering thing because horrible things happen to people. And so I'm wondering if you just have any thoughts on that and the way that you deal with that? Because I can imagine at the level that you work with people, you're oftentimes running into, let's call it a personality that is a part of this person, a part of their personality that refuses to give up the victim mentality because of some of the horrible things that they've perhaps been through. And I just want your perspective on that. Do you see it the way I see it? If so, how do you deal with that? If not, what is a different way that we can frame this? Because from my perspective, this is, to me, at least in the work that I do, the single biggest place people get stuck and the most difficult aspect of change for most people. And so I'm just curious your thoughts on that as sort of a final question in this sort of NLP process.
Oh, that's so great. So in my belief, the quality of your life is the sum total of the emotions that you allow yourself to experience. And traumatic stuff happens to everyone in different ways. Sometimes it's big T, sometimes it's little t trauma. And I know that sometimes it is easier to sink into the enabling of the negative emotion. And there's a comfort that comes with being sad. And if you've been sad for a long, prolonged period of time, there's a comfort that comes to me going into my little hermit hole and not coming out for days. Yet, when we look at the quality of our life overall, what are the things that you want to experience? And usually it's things like peace and happiness. And if the structure of your current nervous system is in the way of that, based upon your interpretation of past events, NLP says we can mold this and use it. If I was diagnosed with cancer at 18 years old, and if I did not reframe it, and instead of saying, now I say that cancer is the biggest gift that's been given to me. But if I didn't reframe that, I could still be, 31 years old and living that victim mentality, and I've been through a lot of night traumas without sleeping and sleep apnea, and a lot of my hair has fallen out. Like, shit's happened and it's been rough, but I absolutely refuse to not have a good life no matter what. And it really comes down to this core belief of, do you give yourself hope? Do you give yourself malleability in the way that you're interpreting your experience? And with people that have gone through big T trauma, it is first and foremost important to feel those emotions. Like you were saying, we don't want to be toxic positivity, brush stuff under the rug. Everything's fine when you're still dealing with these core deep negative emotions. When you allow yourself to feel those deep emotions, you then can make that switch and utilize the emotion, because emotions are energy in motion. And I've heard that emotions last about 15 minutes. But when you make that decision to create an emotion as an identity, that's when you end up with chronic depression for 10 years. That's when you end up with these, I've been sad for this long. It's because we'll come back to that word, decision. You made a decision to be that person. And even if you have diagnoses that tell you you're this type of person, you are who you decide to be ultimately. And you are what your emotions are that you allow yourself to experience. So if you allow yourself to start to experience the malleability of reality and the reframes that are available from the hard experiences, when you get that insight and you start to take those pills instead, you start to take that reframe pill where you're like, oh, I can use this rather than have it use me. You start to feel the benefit of this kind of mind training, this creating this next level human, because you're saying, I am in control of my life no matter what happens. And even if bad stuff happens, I can shift the story, and I can allow that shifted story to become more of my nervous system and the emotion that I'm experiencing. And then you feel that up level. So I think if I were to give listeners, I've had a lot of students that come through the program, and this is the conscious collective that's within the program. And with the Next Level Human program, it's very much empowered into like, let's do this for yourself. But then you go back to your family, or then you go back to your partner and they're like, stop NLPing me. Like, who do you think you are to be, and they're in victim mentality. So if you're a listener and you're listening to this and you don't have that same support and you actually go back to your family and they're like, who do you think you are, this positive mindset guru? Hone in again, come back to your own life and yourself and stay strong with that. And I've had clients that have had that, lack of support at home, and their brothers were like, who do you think you are? And he's like, this is who I am now. Bottom line, I'm done. I am done living in the victim mentality. I know and I recognize that I went through those hard experiences and I'm ready to make life the best that it can be. And so it is this decision, and it is this grounded, it's like a kite, allow yourself to fly and experience, but then make sure that you're holding the end of the kite somewhere that feels good for you. And if I could summarize all that, it's you are who you decide to be right now, no matter what.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, final thoughts for me. I love that idea of, and I want you to just help me remember this the way you said it. But the quality of your life is the diversity of the emotions that you allow yourself to feel. Is that what it is?
Yeah, I said the sum total of the emotions you allow yourself to feel, which is the important part, is that you allow yourself to feel it.
And I love that, Aubrie, because from my perspective, I think when we all look back on our lives, we're going to be in a place, and it's the same thing when we watch an amazing movie. Amazing movies make us laugh, they make us cry, they make us, be a little bit afraid, they make us hopeful, they make us joyful. They really give us the full, sort of spectrum of emotions. And I think what you're teaching us here today is that you cannot have that full life and that full spectrum of emotions if you are not aware of a decision or choice you made about something that happened to you in the past, that now you're telling yourself this unconscious story that you're perhaps not even aware of, and that there are ways to reframe and rewrite this and take responsibility, spot the story, take responsibility for the story, write a new story so that we can get into this place where we get to experience life fully. And I just absolutely love that, because from my perspective, that is the next level human path. And I'll just say one more thing and then get final thoughts from you. But one of the things that I tend to think about in life is that, some of us, we carry pain. And part of me goes, I'm not so sure that we're ever going to be able to get rid of the pain completely. But I certainly think that we can, if we have a backpack full of pain and traumas, we certainly can use it differently. We can use it as a reminder that we have learned lessons that we can pass on to other humans, instead of a reminder that we are worthless. To me, I think, if we're going to be walking around with pain in a backpack, then turn it into a toolkit to help other people with that same pain, a first aid kit to bandage someone else's emotional wounds that we can recognize. And perhaps that's the whole point of our pain in the first place. And it seems to me that NLP certainly seems to begin to reprogram our brain in a way that we can start seeing our pain as a way to do something else with it rather than just feel miserable.
Oh, yes. And to keep utilizing that metaphor, I love that metaphor of the backpack, because a lot of times when I'm working with a client, they'll say something about a story or their trauma, and I'll say, let's unpack that. Because is that backpack too heavy? Let's look at it. Let's see what's in that backpack, because there's a lot of tools that we could use, I bet. And there's probably a lot of extra stuff that you don't need anymore in that backpack. So unpack your backpack of what you've been holding on to and allow it to just kind of lay out in front of you and say, what is part of the story here that's going to help me? Oh, and this is the part of the story that doesn't feel good. Let's unpack that and see if we can mold it and change it and utilize it in a way for our empowerment.
I love that. Aubrie Pohl, everybody, you can see how amazing she is. Tell us how people who want to work with you, catch you on social media, like where can they get your trainings from? Give us some understanding on where they can find you and get more from you.
Ooh, thanks so much for having me on the show today. This has been such a great conversation, and I super appreciate who you are and the next level of content that you bring to your peeps. So to continue tapping into my world and this world of NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, I run a signature program called the Life Through Leadership NLP Academy. I do in-person 6-day full immersion life coaching certification programs. And I also do 12-week online slow drip steady education programs as well. You can find all of that on lifethroughleadershipnlp.com. I'm also on social media, Facebook and Instagram especially. You can look up Aubrie Pohl at It's Aubrie with 3 E's is my Instagram, but you'll find it. And I welcome in. This is the kind of content that I'm so passionate about, and I'm excited for people that are ready to learn even more of it.
You are brilliant, my friend. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for hanging out on the podcast, and we will see you next time.